James, I want to start with a controversial statement. I think that
Hmm.
new things are often better than old things. Wouldn't you agree?
I do agree with you, Martin. That's why I'm such an optimistic person. I mean, I just look back. We used to have only 4 TV channels, and now we've got Facebook Reels. That's surely an upgrade, isn't it? We used to have the post 1945 rules based global order, and now we've got this chaotic multipolar system governed by the idea that might makes right. That's also an upgrade. So new things are obviously better. The march of progress goes on.
Yeah, so possibly it's not always true. Music, for example, as we know, peaked in the 1970s. New cars have been getting worse than old ones for about the last 10 years. And to be honest, James, I know you and I probably disagree on this, but I don't think that modern epic films like Avengers Endgame are going to stand the test of time in the same way that things like Zulu with Michael Caine and Stanley Baker or Lawrence of Arabia have done over the last 60 years. So not everything new is good.
See, I'm not as cultured as you, Martin. I've not seen Zulu, but I have seen Avengers. Though on music, I think you're damn wrong. I think the 70s wasn't the peak. I think it was the early 90s, the summer of ska, 1994, when Real Big Fish were topping the charts. That was surely music's pinnacle.
Yeah, that really is the sort of new musical wave that hit Britain in 1994 was ska, as we're all aware. But now some of these examples are debatable. I think it's fair to say, but there is one category of stuff that objectively it just keeps getting better and better over time, and yet for some strange reason, people are kind of reluctant to admit it, and that is houses. New houses are better than old houses, always. End of story. Period. Right?
No, I agree with you. Podcast done. Podcast over. Everyone can switch off now.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you, Martin. I know we're on the same page on this because a few years ago we both bought new builds at more or less the same sort of time. And I don't know about you, but I love my house because though the estate we live on is a little bit characterless and bland, if I'm honest. But here's the thing: I own a house. And in it, because it's a new build house, everything basically just works. The walls are flat. There's no janky angles. There's no weird little room which you needed 100 years ago for whatever, an outdoor toilet, or where the spinning wheel goes, or where the lead paint was painted or something like that. There's nothing of that. It's just a house that functions and works. There's no weird fireplace that we can't use anymore that's just redundant and taking up space. And because it's a new build, we can drill holes in the walls without worrying about hitting something historical or some asbestos or something like that. So yeah, it's brilliant. New builds are just very satisfying places to live.
Yeah, and let's be honest, nobody has figured out what to do with fireplaces in 2025. It's ridiculous. You can put storage either side. Some people try and put a flat screen TV on the top of it, but that
Those
just
monsters.
looks ridiculous and in the wrong. But well, I don't mind a TV, James. I'm not completely
Martin,
backwards in
Martin,
Bedfordshire.
it's the height. That's the problem. I love a massive TV,
Yes.
but above a fireplace, that's insane.
Yeah, you're just craning your neck.
It's infuriating. There's actually a section of Reddit called TV Too High, and it's one of my
Yes.
favourite things to look at because it's just a way to get mad at other people's design choices. And you just think, why are people choosing to do this? And the worst thing is, it's not when they've got a massive TV above the fireplace, it's when they've got a really tiny one. It just makes no sense, and it's infuriating.
Well, this is how we're going on a massive segue
Yeah.
here, but this is how you know when houses have been sort of set dressed for interior decoration shots or for viewings and things. Is that there's like a whole thread on this as well of images of rooms that have TVs that are clearly in the wrong place. So you have like a TV in one corner and all the chairs are facing in the opposite direction, or it's up on the corner of a wall or something. But yeah, even in normal houses, people are terrible at moving TVs around, and a large part of that is fireplaces. We must purge the fireplaces, James. The dumbest thing in all of this, is that they're putting chimneys on new builds that don't even have fireplaces for decorative purposes.
The mind boggles, Martin.
So... Yes, new builds are fantastic. I think we all agree on that. But weirdly, some people seem to almost despise them. And even the language that we use about houses is sort of weirdly biased. So, for example, if I bought a car off of somebody who had already owned it, we would describe that car as being second hand. And we would say that, I got it cheaper. It was a cheaper deal because the kind of default, the base case that we're comparing against is, you buy a new car or you get a second-hand one that's cheaper. But for houses, basically most houses are second-hand. That's kind of the default. We just buy used houses that other people have discarded and thrown away. And then we treat new builds as kind of against that standard. And you get all this kind of language about the new build premium and, oh, how terribly expensive new build houses are.
Martin, you've sort of blown my mind with that comparison. It makes me think that maybe the postmodernists are right and everything is socio-linguistically constructed. But no, Martin, are new builds actually more expensive, though? I mean, that's what we assume, but is this actually the case?
So yes, it is the case, and I think it's pretty definitive that that's the case. But if you're getting into how much more expensive they are, that gets very, very hazy very quickly. It's very hard to pin down. Some estimates have put it as high as like 40%, but that honestly just sounds absurd to me, just based on my own experience house hunting, and I think most people would probably agree there. What House, which is a real magazine that exists, have suggested 25%.
Does it have regular readers? Like, presumably you just buy it once.
But I mean, this is like Which magazine, which I subscribed to for 6 months when I moved into this house. And then once I had bought all of the things that I needed to buy, I no longer needed a Which subscription, so I could cancel it. Sorry, Which, but I've bought all the things now.
As a contributor to Which Tech magazine, I strongly advise against cancelling.
Yeah, sorry to have directly reduced your income, James. But anyway, once again, coming vaguely back on topic. So yeah, houses are obviously in different parts of the country. It's sort of different premiums in different areas. And people have pointed out that a lot of these estimates, they don't really account for things like the square footage. So once you factor that in, maybe it's more like a 10% premium, which, if I'm honest, sounds about right, I think. Probably similar for you. But obviously that varies. So it's bigger in London, less in the back of beyond, as you'd expect with the higher demand, right?
So have we both been ripped off in buying our new builds then? Should we be campaigning against this sort of new build tax?
Well, no. And again, this sort of comes back to this weird bias in the language that we use to talk about this stuff, because apparently we're now the postmodern podcast, as you said. So you see all of these headlines kind of giving warnings about the new build premium and talking in breathless terms about how the price of your house, it might not go up as much as you thought it was going to, James, in the next 10 years. And it's kind of mad, because unlike new cars, which, as we've established, are all terrible now and just make constant noises at you. I had a car that I rented in Corsica recently, which beeped every single time I went more than 2 kilometers an hour over the speed limit, which after a week on roads with a 50 kilometer an hour speed limit, incredibly annoying. But anyway, new houses are objectively better than old ones. So of course people are willing to pay a bit more for one.
I mean, that makes complete sense. In our case, Martin, we had to buy a new build house. We actually did Help to Buy, the old Help to Buy scheme, which has now been replaced. The rules have all changed. But at the time, the government would only lend us basically an enormous sum of money so that we could then go to a bank and borrow an even larger sum of money. But we had to buy a new build to get that. And it worked out great because, we closed within days of the stamp duty holiday as well. But even so, the house was still incredibly expensive. I mean, that's what radicalized me into doing this podcast. So break it down for me, Martin. Make me feel better about all of this money I've been borrowing and then now have to pay back.
Let's start with the money, and let's specifically start with energy, because that is literally paying you back. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this, it's an obvious topic, but I genuinely don't think most people understand how massive a deal this is. So every house in Britain has an EPC energy rating, goes between A and G, where A is the best, obviously. So let's say that you're a young couple and you're living in a 3-bedroom house and you're about to have a baby. Bit of a stretch, I think, for both of us, but bear with me.
I was going to say, I was on board for the first two. The third one, not so sure, but let's go with it.
But the baby's optional. It's frankly irrelevant. I just wanted to add a bit of, color and style to this metaphor. So how big of a difference do you think it makes to your bills if that house has, say, an A rating versus a C rating?
Ooh, I'm going to pick a number out of the air here, Martin, because to be honest, I don't really look at the electricity bill. I'm bourgeois and middle class, so it just goes out of my bank account and I don't really think about it. But I would guess, I don't know, 20 to 30 pounds a month, something like that.
Right, which I think is probably what most people would think. So if this house has an A rating, 3-bedroom house, 2 people living in it, on average, you'd expect to pay about £54 per month for your combined energy bill. If it's a C rating, and remember the ratings go all the way down to G, that bill goes from £54 a month to £120 a month.
Holy shit.
So that is a massive difference.
That's like paying for like Xbox Game Pass and Netflix on top of your electricity every month if you live in an old house.
Yeah, other examples are available for, more discerning listeners, but sure.
I was trying to think of something more sophisticated or relatable to our very highbrow audience, but no, that's where my mind went.
Sadly, neither of us know what a golf subscription is. Probably a lot more than that.
So obviously that's an enormous difference, Martin, and I'm guessing that old houses are even less efficient than that, right?
They are. And again, this is sort of not a new concept, I suspect, to most listeners, but I think what maybe is less understood is just how stark the difference is and also how recent it is. So, roughly half of all houses in England, certainly, and pretty much in Wales, Scotland as well, were built between 1930 and 1982. On average, these houses aren't A or B or even C. A lot of them are D, or they're even worse than that. So remember, our perfect A-rated energy efficient house would cost you £54 per month. Once you're getting down to D or E, you're talking £140, £170 a month. If you go below that, you're coming up to like £200 a month. Some of those have been upgraded to a C rating since they were built, but virtually none of them, like statistically insignificant numbers of them, are now A or B.
I feel like I'm making money just sat in my house, Martin.
Pretty much. This is the investment being returned. But even and so that maybe isn't so surprising. But even if you move to the next age bracket, so these are houses that are built between 1983 and 2011, so only like 14 years ago, right? These still, on average, only get to a C rating. And again, almost none of these get to A or B, like tiny fractions of a percentage. It's only when you get to 2012, the great halcyon days of the London Olympics, James, that great centrist event that we all loved. It's only when you get there, also the era of the Omni Shambles budget, I believe, if we're reminiscing.
Good
times.
times.
It's there that we get, well, good times, because it's then that we get to the modern standards of house building. And basically, almost overnight, thanks to regulations that came in at that point, almost every home built was suddenly a B rating, at least.
This is sort of blowing my mind, Martin. So let's just take the same 3-bedroom house, I guess, and say you had a 3-bedroom house that was built in, I don't know, 1980, 2000, and 2020, or 20 years apart each. What's the difference here? What's the damage?
So, let's set a baseline, right? So, not all houses that are current are an A rating. Most of them, on average, are actually a B, but that's still very good. So, the 2020 house is going to cost you about £75 per month to run for the energy bill. If we go back to the year 2000, or even like 2008, say, a house built then won't cost you £75 a month, it'll cost you £120 per month. And if we then go back again to the 1980s, that house is going to cost you probably £140 if you're lucky, but often more like £150, £160 a month to run. So you're talking a difference of hundreds and hundreds of pounds per year. And if you're there for, say, 12, 13 years, that's literally like 10 grand out of your pocket paying for this ridiculously inefficient, flimsily built shithole of a 1980s house. No offense to listeners in 1980 houses. I'm sure they're lovely.
Because if my parents listen to this, I do apologise to my parents. It's a very nice house they have, but this is sort of blown my mind. I mean, even just that gap of time, and maybe it's just because I'm old now. Do we know if there's been like technological change there, or is it regulatory? I mean, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised if it's technological or something, because look at the phone in my pocket and how that's changed in the last 20 years. But still, that's mind blowing how big a difference that is.
Well, it's a combination of both, right? So we are just much better at building houses than we were 50 years ago, but also those modern standards have been enforced by regulatory regimes. And that's why the year ranges that I'm giving are so precise, because they basically map onto when there were big shifts in the standards that people had to build houses to. So it's kind of a combination of both. But like you see in modern houses now, we have breathable windows that deal with mold and cavity wall insulation. We have lofts that are padded to 18 inches thick with insulation. So technology, standards. And this is also why, if you look at older buildings, for example, so take civic buildings like town halls. In Maidenhead, there was a big uproar because they were discussing, why don't we just demolish the town hall and build a new one? And lots of people were saying, oh, surely that's terrible. It's bad for the environment. There's a building already there. Surely we can just reuse that. But it turns out that older buildings are so bad and so energy inefficient that often it's actually both cheaper and better for the environment to just completely demolish the building and build a new one.
But obviously, everyone hates the idea of demolishing stuff, right?
Yeah, people are weirdly attached to stuff that was built in the 1960s, even though most of it, as we discussed, is dog shit, looks awful, and costs an absolute fortune to run. But there's, again, a weird, persistent perception that newer buildings and new builds are lower in quality. The Chartered Institute of Builders did a survey in 2023, which found that 55% of people thought that new builds were lower quality than old houses, which is kind of mad.
And it's not just, about energy efficiency, is it? The benefits of new builds go much further. There's no damp. Crucially, during the winter, our house has modern insulation, so it stays nice and warm. My windows don't rattle. There's no draft going through. And I guess this is efficiency in a sense, but also it's just a much nicer house to live in. So the quality of the house is really excellent, which is odd because sometimes I look at this house and think a lot of it's made of cardboard. We literally cut a hole in some of our internal doors to install cat flaps inside our house so our cats could move between rooms when doors are closed. And it turns out literally the doors are physically made of cardboard. But even so, it's still clearly good stuff. The house is clearly standing and sturdy and is clearly keeping the heat in and working a lot better than the old crap.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to clarify, I think it's a special kind of cardboard, James. I'm not entirely sure that's how they refer to it. But exactly, they're clean, they're efficient, they don't get so many pests and things in. Every house I'd lived in up until the early 2000s would have sort of mold and mildew and condensation. We don't have that because we have windows that vent properly. And crucially, James, if you're in a new build, it means I don't have to sit on another man's toilet. I can christen my own porcelain throne, as it were. But, luxuries aside, if you look at secondhand properties, there's usually like a mountain of bad taste crap that you have to deal with. I remember before we found this place, I was looking at, rooms in houses that were painted sort of bright Gothic purple and red, and there was one that had like Roman columns all through the hallway, which was just like a normal sized hallway, but for some reason they thought, hey, let's just fill it with massive columns.
I feel like that would suit you, Martin. That feels very Martin Robbins coded.
I mean, on a larger scale, perhaps, but it looks like it would have been pretty awkward to get around. So this is the kind of stuff you have to deal with secondhand homes, which we've established are terrible. You buy one and suddenly you're living in a chintzy hellhole and you've got to remodel the whole thing. So again, new homes, always better.
Obviously, I agree with you on this. We're on the same page. But why do you think then perceptions amongst the broader public are so bad? Why do people hate the new builds?
So I think there's a few things in play, and I'm kind of going from my own terrible opinions and anecdotal experience, along with some genuine commentary from house builders and developers and people who've been researching this a bit, because to be honest, there's not much good data here. I think one thing that comes up a lot is snagging. So typically, if you buy a new house, there are all sorts of little things as it settles, as things expand in the first summer or winter. You get little cracks in the walls. You get all the stuff around the bath that I can't remember the name of. As the bath settles, that can kind of peel away, and you have to sort of redo it. Maybe there's a light fitting that's not been wired in properly. That kind of stuff. And in those cases, you just get the builders back in and they fix it essentially.
Yeah, I remember when we first moved into our house and all sorts of people would warn us about snagging. Oh, God, look out for the snagging. Be careful, do your really detailed snagging survey. And I think we found basically nothing wrong with our house. Actually, on the first day, the plugs weren't working downstairs, but that was literally one phone call, an electrician turning up and pressing one switch in the consumer unit by the door, and then that was all fine. And I think we've had a few little bits of maintenance since then. The boiler broke down once, but like nothing significant. It's just like normal house stuff. It's been completely fine.
Yeah, and this stuff is usually superficial. It's not really, to do with the fabric of the house per se. It's just new houses settle in and they're complex things and things need a bit of fixing up. And I think this sort of leads to a perception of like, oh, they've been built to a shoddy standard and all this stuff shouldn't happen. But I think what people forget is that old houses, and this may shock you, James, used to be new. And when they were new, they also had snagging issues. And honestly, the number of times, like, I don't know, Liz probably follows builders channels on YouTube quite often and sort of home DIY channels. I'm quite interested in that stuff as well because I love a bit of DIY. I like to knock up a crafty wall at the weekend. But if you look at this stuff, so often you'll see someone pulling a bit of wallpaper down from a house that was built in the 70s or something, and half the wall comes down with it. Or there's like just debris piled up underneath some floor tiles because they were like, oh, there's a hole there, we'll just shovel some rubbish into it and be done with it. Because that was the standard of a lot of building back then. And there's a kind of survival fallacy where the stuff that's still there and that is okay has been dealt with and snagged and done up over the years. And so, yes, of course, it's better. And if you have a new build, yeah, you're going to have some snagging, but you also have 10-year guarantees and much more consumer protection and a better standard house.
Yeah, I think a lot of these YouTubers will, like, maybe this is a self-selection thing. But whenever they move into a house and suddenly they want to rip it all apart and they have to change the whole thing and it becomes this enormous ordeal in their lives, like it's like a grand designs type thing where they're trying to basically rebuild the house from the sort of the frame almost. That sounds like a nightmare. Whereas a new build house, you buy it and it's fine from day one. But Martin, it feels like this hostility goes a much deeper. It's surely not just an analytical look at going, yes, well, if you weigh it up, then new builds are better or worse. It's surely more emotional than that, I think.
Yeah, and so this is where I come onto my own personal pet theory about what the second major cause of this is. And I'll be honest, this is not going to make me popular, but I think it's pure cope.
So you're saying that people want new builds to be awful. I guess it's like I had to convince myself that my GameCube was better than my friend's PS2, because even though he had GTA 3 and Metal Gear Solid 3 and I had Pikmin, because I had that in my house as the thing I'd spent my pocket money on, I had to pretend I had the best thing.
Once again, pitching perfectly to our professional, serious demographic here, James. But yeah, I mean, as we know, basically all of the problems that we currently have in society are the fault of social media, right? And so every time a new housing development comes to a village, there's massive opposition, not necessarily that big, but vocal, that's orchestrated on usually Facebook. And what inevitably follows, if you look through the comments, is people saying, oh, I don't want these houses to be built. And then Derek, age 60, who's semi-retired and now spends all his day radicalizing himself on Facebook and getting het up about small boats and reform, is sort of comes in going like, oh, they're all terrible anyway. You know, I saw a new build house and half the wall was falling down. And I think where it comes from is, if you take somewhere like the small village where I live, the new build estates are being built next to essentially crap 1980s bungalows. Again, no offense, neighbors, and sort of terraced houses that are all kind of different and higgledy-piggledy and different styles, different eras, not all of them in particularly good repair. And then a big estate goes up with lots of lovely new houses that are all much nicer, much more similar. And they sort of have to convince themselves that these places are secretly awful and that the people who live in them are just miserable, because otherwise they'd have to realize that they kind of want one as well.
I can sort of relate. I want my enemies to be miserable, even if they're actually delighted and happy and living fulfilling lives. But anyway, Martin, what's the moral of this story? I guess it's that new builds are great and you should prepare to be hated by your neighbours.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, to be honest, it's a small price to pay for cheap heating and not having asthma.